So last week, on Friday, the 2nd of May, Lucy Powell, who is a Labour MP, who is the leader of the House of Commons on Labour's front bench in Keir Starmer's cabinet, joined BBC show Any Questions. And Tim Montgomerie, the founder of Conservative Home and Unheard, former advisor to Boris Johnson, now turned Reform UK advisor, was on the panel, and he asked Lucy Powell if she had seen Channel 4's new documentary, which is called Groomed, a national scandal. Now, it's a fair question to ask, given our collective media and political class in the UK ran an astroturfed circus around the Netflix drama, which they called a documentary, Adolescence, for almost a month. It's impressive, I suppose, a mighty coincidence that Tender, the charity promoting adolescence, was co-founded by Keir Starmer's ex-girlfriend and has received millions in government grants over the years. So a fair question to ask a sitting government minister if she has seen a documentary on a scandal that her government are accused of covering up, or at the very least, grossly mishandling. And Lucy Powell's response was to dismiss this question as a dog whistle and blowing a little trumpet, insinuating that Tim had only raised it because of the race and religion of the perpetrators and to score cheap political points. Have a listen.
I don't know whether you saw the documentary on Channel 4 about rape gangs over this.
We want to blow that little trumpet now, do we? Yeah,
okay. There was a real issue.
Let's get that dog whistle out, shall we?
Okay, Lucy. Yeah. The councils, there were so many people who were so afraid for good. Can I just finish the point, just for one minute?
Finish that point, Tim, and then I'll bring in Helen.
Look, there were so many people in local government, in the authorities, who, for good reasons, were worried about upsetting community tensions, that those girls went undefended. Now, there were good reasons for it, but no one has still been brought to justice for that. So you tell me, Lucy, that this isn't a culture in local government. It's just not true.
Now, after the scandal erupted on X, she tried making excuses. She responded to Alison Pearson, the Telegraph journalist, who is now famous for receiving a knock on the door from Essex police for a deleted tweet in relation to a public order offence and a non-crime hate incident. She tried excusing her comments, first of all, by saying, quote, "It was because of the context of the discussion, not because of the issue." So deflecting, denying, and then deleting, because that post is no longer available. Fortunately, we do have it screenshotted. So there it is. She then posted to X what she described as an apology. "In the heat of the discussion on Any Questions, AQ, I would like to clarify that I regard issues of child exploitation and grooming with the utmost seriousness. I'm sorry if this was unclear. I was challenging the political point scoring around it, not the issue itself. As a constituency MP, I've dealt with horrendous cases. This government is acting to get to the truth and deliver justice." Now, excuse me, but in the heat of the moment, I've never accidentally minimised, deflected, or denied as a racist dog whistle child rape, torture, abuse, and in many instances, murder. Funny how I've managed to never do that, isn't it, Lucy? And it received such a loud, outraged reaction because it was clear that Lucy Powell was going on pure gut instinct and was acting as the id of Starmer's government. This is the reason that she won't be sacked, by the way, despite Labour's record low approval ratings, especially in Keir Starmer, despite Labour's awful performance in the recent local elections, which we'll get to later. Keir Starmer could try to save face by throwing one of his least popular cabinet ministers, especially after this remark, under the bus, but he won't, because if you remember, Keir Starmer, in the height of this scandal reaching global attention thanks to Elon Musk on X, responding to the likes of Charlie Peters, Sam Bidwell, and Max Temper's efforts, as well as my own in a small way, to bring this attention to the global fore. In response to that, Keir Starmer said that too many MPs in Britain were jumping on a far-right bandwagon.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth, and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because A robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
So Keir Starmer genuinely believes that dismissing the rape, torture, abuse and murder of white working class girls is just fine and dandy because the perpetrators are Pakistani Muslim men on whom Labour has historically relied to be a client constituency voting bloc. And of course, in marginal constituencies like Jess Phillips, where she only has a 693 vote majority, with Independent and Workers' Party of Britain pro-Gaza candidates nipping at her heels and heckling her at her election victory speech, they don't want to upset said community and have them wander off the plantation. And so they prioritise their sectarian concerns. And this is something that I mentioned last week. This is why Pakistani heritage Birmingham Labour MP Tahir Ali is lobbying for the censorship of those who criticise or burn the Quran as a form of protest, and why he and sectarian Muslim MP Ayub Khan were lobbying for the construction of an airport in Mirpur, Pakistan, the region, by the way, where, as a British anthropologist found in the late 80s, the majority of British Pakistanis can trace their heritage back to until the recent Boris wave. So that means because these rape and torture gangs have been going on for multiple decades now, that Mirpur is the exact region where the majority of the perpetrators come from. As I said, I'm not interested in that airport unless it receives more deportation flights than it facilitates departures. But anyway, look, getting back to Lucy Powell, she's really speaking on behalf of what the government really think about this issue. And again, it's telling they were obsessed with adolescents, but not this. So they are clearly choosing their client groups, and they are choosing what is the acceptable face of misogyny in this country, while willingly, knowingly importing through illegal and legal routes virulent hatred of women, particularly white, working class, non-Muslim women, by men from the barbarous third world, where rape and torture is used as a means of keeping one's wife, one's family members subjugated, one's clan in a state of honour, and as a punishment in intertribal warfare. And so this will be excused. And it was excused over the weekend when Wes Streeting, the sitting health secretary, who, I remind you, helped draft the all-party parliamentary group on British Muslims' definition of Islamophobia, which, much like his definition of a woman, was circular because it said Islamophobia is a kind of racism rooted in racism that concerns Muslimness and perceived Muslimness. Right. Anyway, Wes Streeting did the media rounds and said on Sky News, in Lucy Powell's defence, yes, I think she's made a genuine mistake. She's owned up to it, she said sorry, and we'll move on. Now, first of all, she hasn't said sorry. If you notice the wording of Lucy Powell's so-called apology, it positioned the public, who heard exactly what she said, as the ones that did Lucy Powell wrong, because they misinterpreted her, and she has in fact always been on the side of victims, even though it was the victims themselves, the survivors of the rape gangs, who criticised her. Sarah Wilson from Rochdale said, quote, "They never cared and they never will. They totally dismiss survivors and our experiences of being groomed." And this was in response to Powell's comments. And actually, Scarlett and her dad Marlon, who were featured in the Channel 4 documentary, told The Telegraph, quote, "We feel abused and disrespected once again, and we did not anticipate this kind of treatment from our government leaders." So this is comments like Powell's, reinforcing the chilling effect about discussing the exact race, religion, ethnic background and beliefs of the Pakistani Muslim perpetrators here, placing that chilling effect upon them, saying that to even discuss this crime is a racist dog whistle, which was the reason why it was all dressed up in euphemisms and shoved under the rug by police forces, social workers, local councillors and politicians for decades. Lucy Powell doing that is taken by the victims and their families as a kind of repetition of the abuse they suffered. So, no, Wes, no, Lucy, you don't get to decide if your apology is sufficient, and you don't get to decide when the public moves on from this. And this is why people were clamouring, me included, for Powell to be sacked and or resign. This was Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, and then leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, by retweeting him, called for her to be sacked. Robert Jenrick shared the original clip of BBC's Any Questions and said it was absolutely abhorrent that she'd done this. Katie Lamb MP, famous, of course, for challenging Jess Phillips during her announcement that the rape gang inquiries would be rescinded before they were hastily reinstated because of all the backlash. Katie Lamb MP said that she should apologise or resign. And Rupert Lowe wrote, independent MP Rupert Lowe, obviously, who's leading the independent rape gang inquiry, which as a crowdfunder has surpassed £600,000. Rupert Lowe wrote a letter to Powell and then later compared her treatment to that of Lucy Connolly, the traumatised, because of her miscarriage, childminder and wife of a Conservative councillor who is currently rotting in prison for, I think, 32 months because she made an ill-advised tweet during last summer's Southport protests and riots and then hastily deleted it. And then the Crown Prosecution Service and police misquoted and misrepresented her statements after her conviction and after she was encouraged to plead guilty because she thought she would go home and see her daughter sooner. She has now been denied visitation rights after speaking to journalist Alison Pearson and telling her story. So Lucy Connolly is rotting in prison for a short-lived and deleted tweet for which she apologised. Lucy Powell remains a cabinet minister despite denying, or at least minimising and dismissing as a racist dog whistle, the rape and torture of thousands of girls for decades in Britain, while her own government is embroiled in a scandal about their lack of appetite to bring the perpetrators and those covered it up to justice. So, yeah, there's very much a two-tier policing system in Britain, something that the Home Affairs Select Committee recently denied as a conspiracy theory, despite the members of the Home Affairs Select Committee either being members of councils like Sean Davies in Telford, where the rape gangs have operated and where the cover-up was perpetuated for years for fears of inflaming community tensions, or the likes of Belle Ribeiro Addy, who's very happy to throw accusations of two-tier policing against the Met Police when it concerns black suspects who are overwhelmingly more likely to commit violent and gang-related crime. But as soon as it concerns the mistreatment of the white host majority population of the UK, well, two-tier policing couldn't possibly exist because it doesn't depict her identity as the aggrieved victim group entitled to restitution and reparations, isn't it? Now, you would think this is utterly inexcusable. You would think that Labour continuing to cover up, deny, deflect and obfuscate from the Pakistani rape gang scandal is not something anyone can rush to the defence of. But no, BBC journalist and former Guardian editor Michael White decided to dive in front of that particular bullet on X, and he defended Powell, saying, and I quote, "I understand why Lucy Powell apologised for her dog whistle comment in our dishonest media world," so blaming the external media, even though she was appearing on the BBC, which is heavily biased towards Labour, and he would know, as a BBC contributor who supports Labour. But, he says, but she was quite right. People like Tiny Tim would not have raised such an issue if the groomers, murderers or rapists, if they'd, that's a typo on his part, if they'd been one of their own. So he is accusing Tim Montgomerie of only raising the issue because the perpetrators were of an ethnic and religious outgroup. Now, contained within this is the tacit admission that the rape gang scandal is perpetuated by an immigrant outgroup to the indigenous in-group. So at least we've got that tacit admission inside this defence of the indefensible. Michael White thought this was an absolutely stunning tweet. Now, I would suggest to Mr. White and Lucy Powell that it's not so self-evident that Lucy Powell is working on behalf of these victims if the victims themselves say, "You've basically made me relive my rape and torture." And if you even have to clarify that in the heat of the moment you may have been perceived to minimise child rape, then you may have miscommunicated something, or you may have said something abhorrent. And so the problem is with you rather than the broader media environment, the person who brought it up, or the people who all heard exactly what you said and were shocked and disgusted. But then, right, in response to criticism, White wrote, "It was horrible, but it was a bit more complicated than that, wasn't it? Sex often is." No, Michael, child rape is not complicated at all. Weird that you would think it was. Now, I know that some former presenters like Hugh Edwards at the BBC would think that sexuality and children has more blurred lines than the law or sane thinking people like us would say it does. I think it's fundamentally not complicated, inexcusable, evil, and wrong. So it's strange that Michael White would say it is complicated, and then later repost a clipping from a Rotherham local newspaper where a 15-year-old girl was hauled up in front of court after being abused by Pakistani male perpetrators and condemned as sexually promiscuous. And he said, well, this is proof that it's always been complicated. No, it's proof that the cover-up has been going for 50 years in 50 towns and cities across the UK. Work which, by the way, Open Justice, Adam Rem and Melissa Tort, and Charlie Peters of GB News, as well as a few other people who'd like to remain anonymous, have been doing tracking where the convictions, where the gangs have been operating up and down the UK, and also drawing lines for the trafficking routes between towns and cities where inquiries and convictions have not even happened yet. Bradford being one of the major towns where a lot of this activity intersects, but where the local council, dominated historically by Labour and also by members of Pakistani and Asian heritage councillors, they've been blocking local inquiries for ages, despite having a large volume of offences and suspects in their area. Very curious that. It's also even more sick and ironic because the Channel 4 documentary in question, which I say people should watch because it interviews the victims of the gangs and is honest about the Pakistani heritage of the rapists. It doesn't delve into the religious motivations, which we all know are there. For example, subjecting girls to forced Quran readings, having them bark like a dog in a cage, given the prominence of dogs in Islam. That takes on some symbolic meaning there. Very, very degrading. And, of course, the wives of the rapists excusing to Yasmin Ali Harvey Brown the acts committed by their family members and members of their community against white girls because they said, by Allah, have you seen how they dress? Saying they bring it upon themselves, right? In the Channel 4 documentary, this asabaya, which is the Arabic word for kind of clannish solidarity, ethnic and religious solidarity, which entrenches the cover-up among these communities and is the reason why they see white working-class girls as not their moral equivalents. They only extend morality as far as their clan, family, and religion, allows them to. This Channel 4 documentary explains or provides an example of how this is perpetuated today. So it's extra ironic that Michael White would accuse Tim Montgomerie of only raising this because the perpetrators are his ethnic outgroup, and he wouldn't dare raise the problem of a white rapist, for example. Pure projection by the woke part, as usual, because in the Channel 4 documentary, it follows a campaign group run by a woman called Samira Khan, and Samira Khan has broken the law because her brother, Irfan Khan, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison for 3 offences, including rape and making threats to kill. And they broke the law because her protest group, insisting that her brother is innocent of all wrongdoing, that the charges are made up, that the victims are not real victims, that the court system, the police, and the victims themselves are all racist, and this is one giant conspiracy against the Pakistani community who didn't do anything wrong. They decided to live stream with her brother while he was in prison. And then, on live streams, they decided to disclose the protected identities of the girls who had been raped. So, I would hope the law is brought to bear down upon them. But it does show that the reason this has been hushed up for so long isn't just because MPs like Dennis McShane, as a self-professed Guardian reading liberal lefty, didn't want to rock the multicultural boat, or because Simon Danchuk called the police on Katie Hopkins for saying it was disgraceful for him to drape himself in the Pakistani flag, just as the rape gangs received their first round of attention around 2013 to 2015 as convictions were rolling through in Oxford, Rotherham, Rochdale, and the like. It's not just because local councillors and social workers and police officers were petrified of inflaming community tensions and so had to refer euphemistically to the Pakistani taxi drivers who were facilitating the trafficking of girls around other cities to men of a certain background working in a certain occupation. As you could read in the Casey report, it isn't just all that. It's because the community themselves were keeping a lid on it. Lots of people knew. Lots of people, after they were confronted with the atrocities committed by their husbands, fathers, brothers, cousins, and sons, made excuses for it. Or, after the perpetrators were released from prison, they assimilate seamlessly back into the community. I mean, for example, there's a haunting tale that Charlie Peters often tells about the paedophile honesty box in one house, where a girl would be kept hostage, she would be raped repeatedly by men, and they would be expected to deposit their money for her pimping out in a box on the front of the house, and at the end of the month, the landlord would come along and pick up the tab for all of these children that had been raped by their Pakistani Muslim captors. The reason a lid is kept on this is because these communities, these ethnic and religious enclaves, do not have solidarity or sympathy for the host population and their abused children. And so the projection is disgusting and ironic by the likes of Michael White, who say that we wouldn't be talking about this if there were white rapists. Yeah, we would. The reason we're talking about this is because, not often enough, in my opinion, see Hugh Edwards, but largely, white rapists are not systematically covered up for by all the powers that be because of their race and religion. And the Pakistani rape gangs certainly are. The cover-up is continuing even today. Now, it's interesting as well to note that Michael White, his son, is the former Chief of Staff to Keir Starmer from September 2021 to November 2022. And that's Sam White. Sam White is married to a woman called Katie Jane White, and it might sound a familiar name to you if you're in Leeds North West, because she's been the Labour MP since 2024. It's notable that Leeds North West has seen vast numbers of sexual offences committed against children by Pakistani and Asian heritage men since 2009, according to some new data, with a conviction rate of only 17% across all of West Yorkshire. But since becoming an MP, she hasn't spoken about this issue once in Parliament. Not once. She participated in a violence against women and girls session in Parliament, but didn't raise the problem of the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs operating in her own area. Curious how the family are just completely silent on this, and how Michael White might feel the need, despite professing to be an ostensibly neutral journalist and a truth teller and holding power to account, feel the need to run interference for Keir Starmer's Labour government, who have done nothing but diminish, deny and deflect from the historic and ongoing abuses perpetrated by Pakistani Muslim men, and to call those raising the alarm about this unconscionable treatment of children jumping on a far-right bandwagon.